in case anybody wants to catch this. I already apologized to the folks on the Zoom call, but anybody who may watch this video, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I promise this doesn't mean that I've checked out early, that I'm trunky. I promise it was a perfect storm of absent-mindedness on my part and a phone that needed to be updated. Before you ask your questions, let me address something that I've already gotten from several of you. Chad Webb back in January had announced that there was going to be some changes to the graduation requirement. I loved, by the way he framed it. If you haven't read that talk, you ought to check it out. But he talks about this idea that in the parable of the sower, we spend a lot of time on the wayside and on the stony ground and then on the thorns. But then when we talk about the good ground, we're just like, yeah, and there's some 30, some 60, some 100. But he said, I wonder if sometimes in seminary, we spend all our time only recognizing the 100-fold and not the 60 and the 30, which are also good grounds. And it was in the spirit of that he talked about how there would be some changes in some requirements. You've got some kids who are just rock stars at their personal scripture study. And then we've got kids that are trying and they're only producing 30-fold and 60 and 100-fold. I'll just say this. First of all, we're not going to change anything this semester, even though there was that email that was just sent out last week, I think. Because in a global church, there's never a time when anybody's off of school. And so they just had to make the announcement when they make the announcement. But for us, we're mid-semester. Doesn't make any sense for us to try to reintroduce anything to our kids. It doesn't make any sense for me to scramble and try to give you a new system. We're going to handle all that over the summertime. And so just wait for that. And then the new stuff will come in the fall. But I'll give you a little teaser just so you understand, because there are some misconceptions out there. We are still expecting to help our students develop a habit of daily scripture study. That is still a part of what we're trying to do. In fact, I feel that our crew is in the best position to understand the changes, because I've been telling you for years now, we're not making our kids do makeup work with scripture reading, because that doesn't make any sense. We're trying to help them develop a habit of scripture study. And if a kid has not been reading their scriptures every day, why on earth would we give them double the amount of scriptures to read? We're trying to help them just get the habit started. Anyway, it's going to be more of that kind of stuff. And then there will be some specific blocks within each book, scripture year to read. But again, all those details are going to be coming. The only thing that will be pertinent for us right now is the assessment has changed. And you've already seen it in the pacing that there are these, every month, I think there's a learning assessment like lesson, assess your learning kind of a lesson. And that seems to be more what we're going to focus on is that, but there is a doctrinal mastery assessment. That is the assessment for this semester. But you'll get that at the end of it's in the appendix, and I'll send an email out and we'll get that all squared away. But daily requirements of attendance, that's not going anywhere. So anyway, any questions about all that? Again, we'll cover it more deeply in the summertime, but anything that is unclear right now.
So Shad, I guess I do have a question, and some of this may be from the fact that I'm back teaching this year after having, prior stints like 15 years ago, 5 years ago.
Lots has changed in 15 years.
It seems like every year the requirements are changed. And so I'm so, for example, and I mentioned this to you, I have students that have almost perfect attendance. They come, they participate, they pass their assessments. But in terms of their daily reading, I mean, they've been in the 40 to 70% range, and it would take a Herculean effort, or maybe mathematically impossible for some of them at this point to hit 80%.
Yeah. If we're taking it as a whole year average, right? And so this is what I've been telling people, Chuck, but you're kind of new. You just got put back into the calling. I am not interested in an aggregate percentage. I'm more concerned if a student was really good at the beginning of the year and they stink at reading their scriptures in April and May, but their average is 75%. I'm actually super worried about that, because that means that child is going into the summer break without a habit of scripture study. That's not great at all. And so what I've been instructing teachers to do is you help your student, you work with them you shepherd them individually and help them get their habit going. I think you ought to check in weekly. That's why I've loved this raffle idea, because for those of you who aren't doing the raffle, you ought to do the raffle because it's working. Students are reading their scriptures more. And even though it's a little bit of an extrinsic motivation, and I know we can like say, well, we want them to do it from their heart. I get it, but they're teenagers. And getting a Yeti water bottle and a visit from Brother Anderson, it's fun, right? Michaela, it's fun. That was fun. It's fun for me to go out and see your guys' great classes. And I was in Valpo, Indiana this morning to deliver another bottle. It was fun. We want them to develop the habit. So here's the conversation I had with a student that is one of Cheryl's students, actually, who graduated last year, not from seminary, but he graduated from high school, you know, Eli. And he got his mission call and he's working on his visa. And there was a little box to check that said you graduated from seminary, and he has not. So he sent me an email and he says, what do I need to do to graduate from seminary? So we pulled up his transcript. There was some, you know, there's a bunch of semesters of 65%. There was one of like 42% attendance. There was one of like 50-ish percentage. There were a number of assessments he hadn't taken. And then there was reading that was not even marked. And so we worked out the, you know, what we're going to do about the percentage of attendance. He's been coming to Institute every day, by the way, Cheryl, since the beginning of the year. Even though he's in Missouri, he zooms in. He never misses. And I love that. I do too. I do too. The assessments are easy. We're just going to email him the assessments and he'll just do it. But what do we do about the reading? So I said, all right, Eli, what's your reading looking like? What's your personal scripture study looking like? And he's like, it's not good. He says, I do read at least a verse a day. I'm like, that's great. You're going to be a missionary when? And he said, July, I don't know, sometime in July. Yeah. I said, you're going to need to up your game, Eli. You can't be reading a verse a day and think you're going to be ready to go. And so I said, so what do you think is a good goal for somebody who's about to preach this stuff? He says, I think I can do a half hour a day. I said, that's great. So you have between now and July when you leave to prove to me that you are going to read every day a half hour a day. And before you go to the MTC, let's have a conversation. And the second you tell me, Brother Anderson, my habit of scripture reading is daily, I'm going to go check his box. I'm not going to go do a bunch of math. I'm not going to, you know, we're going to just get him we're going to give him the requirement and we're going to send it off. And that's what we're going to do. So that's got to be based on each one of your students. If you have a student who right now is saying, I haven't done great, but I want to do great. Well, we still have time. We're early April. I mean, if they start getting a good habit going from April to May, and you feel like there's a change in them, they're reading their scriptures, let's check that box. If you feel like, it's still a little touch and go with them, you could totally say with them, listen, I'll check in with you a couple times throughout the summer. You keep this habit going through the summer. And if you can show me that you got a good habit through the summertime, then we'll check the box for last year. That's what I'm interested in. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So we want to bless them with the habit. We're not worried about the math. So, and again, that'll change just a little bit in the next year, because then there will be blocks of scripture we do want them to read additionally. But even more so, President Eyring told Chad Webb that this is going to require teachers to be individual shepherds for each one of their students. And you're darn right it is. That's what you ought to be. That's what we're hoping you'll be in this way and in lots of ways. So I hope that makes sense. Any other questions of that, Chuck?
That's helpful. And I see that and I agree with it. I would say, though, that Sister Pike is worried about the math.
No, she's not.
And there's a chart that she looks at that has a percentage. So.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I tell Becky, we've had this conversation several times. She's like, you just want me to check all the boxes to make it 75%? I said, yes. She goes, but they didn't read those days. And I said, the sin be upon me, Becky. We're marking those boxes. And honestly, once it's all closed out, all we do is check one box that says they did their reading. So it's not a big deal. So I know you get Becky and she's great. She's great about like keeping all of us, me included, on track. But the principle of that's always going to be the same, is we want to help them get that habit. So I know sometimes you might get a little bit of a mixed message, but that's what that means. And all she wants to know from you is this kid meeting the requirement? And if you tell her yes, we'll check, we click the box. That's what we'll do. So whether it's in my seminary or not. So
I love it.
Awesome. Allison, you got a question? I can tell you're going for that mute button.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Couple questions. Two. One, my understanding is that seminary is in session when school is in session. So we go to the very last day of school.
It's complicated when you have a bunch of school districts.
And the seniors have to come for 2 weeks after they're done with school, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you've got, again, it's the same principle as the reading through the summer kind of a thing. If you've got a student, a senior who's been not great at attending and they need those 2 weeks of attendance to really put them over, that's one thing. But I'll be honest, you guys all remember what it was like being a senior in high school. Once they graduate, not from seminary, once they graduate from high school, I mean, we're barely holding on to them throughout their senior semester. Here's what I would say, Allison. So, Allison, you're in what stake again?
Cape Girardeau.
Okay, so you've got, and are you in Farmington or are you in Carbondale?
Nope, Cape.
You're in Cape. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And you got
Yeah.
the big, beautiful class that we all hung out with, and they were awesome.
Yes, yes.
You've got an institute class in that building Thursday nights, Wednesday nights, one of those nights. And honestly, one thing I would be doing, if you've got some seniors that are starting to really struggle to come, I'd invite them to start attending institute. That's what I would do.
Okay.
And I even feel comfortable if we're saying, if you go to institute every week, you don't need to come to seminary anymore. Let's hand you off. You start being a young adult because you guys have that you've got that going on. I love the soft opening to young adulthood instead of us begging them at seminary graduation, please sign up for institute. You know, if you've got a seminary program or an institute program that's going and you've got some seniors who want to attend in lieu of seminary, just let me know and then we'll understand if they are going to institute, we're counting that for seminary. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a great answer. Yeah. Okay, and my second question was, on occasion, my second adult does not show up and I am there alone. Is this something I need to?
Yes.
I mean, I know it's not supposed to be that way, but you know, should I be saying we're not having seminary today because there's not another adult, or should I?
No, this is something I'd bring up to, you know, I mean, I'm sure you have, to priesthood leaders.
Yeah, I have.
If worse comes to worse, honestly, if there is another adult you could just FaceTime in, maybe you just have somebody ready to go that like, hey, if because you have that young adult that comes in as your plus one, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah. And if that, you know, that's as reliable as young adults sometimes are, I'm sure. And then your team teacher, I guess you guys just swap out and are not. Yeah. And that's another situation. So you might just find out, is there some people that can just be on FaceTime? And that's what I would do. Zoom them or FaceTime them, put them in put your phone in a Kleenex box up on the thing. All it is about having, so that you don't get in a situation where either you're accused or a student's unsafe. We just want to make sure everybody's just safe in the world we live in. So
I wish I'd thought of that. That's a great solution. So
we can use technology to do too deep if we need to. It's not ideal, but it works. So
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
So what we've been doing, because we've got so many school districts, different school schedules. So anytime 2 school districts are out, we haven't been having seminary that day, and it really hasn't. It's been fine. I'm just wondering if there's like a certain requirement for how many seminary days we're supposed to be in, because at the end of the year, like we have one school that goes all the way till June 13th, and the majority of our schools are done the very end, like the last week in May. Yeah. So we were going to stop the last week of May, but what's the number requirement?
Yeah, so I've got a multi-folded answer for you. 180 days is what we want to try to go for, somewhere in there. And that comes, and that may not even be like set in stone. That's just how many lessons we used to have. But now it's come follow me. We have an indefinite number of days, right? And so there's not really a hard and fast, but that's the number in my head is 180 because that's how many lessons we have. What I would do if I were you is I would pick the critical mass and then do your best to average it out. So like, for instance, you've got 3 school districts. How many of your students that come are in each one of those school districts?
Oh, you're asking?
Mhm.
If one particular school is out, half of our kids are gone.
Yeah.
And then, and then the other ones are,
Yeah.
kind of
I
hitting it.
would take the one that's half. And I think I would tell the students, we're going to stick with their schedule. If you can't come because it's your spring break, it's your spring break. Totally get it. If, is that the one that goes till May, or is that the one that goes into June?
May.
Yep. We're going to end at May with this school district. That's when we're going to do it, but we're going to start with them at the beginning of the school year because that's when they started. But if you don't want to come at that time, hey, you have 25%, you've got 75% attendance. And so you can miss a couple of days. So don't kill yourself over it, but we're just going to stick with this where the critical mass of students are. That's what I would do. That would simplify it for everybody.
Okay.
Garrett, you got a question?
Well, I had texted you about this, so if you're going to cover it anyway, then I don't want to take your time. But
text me or give it to me. Let's go.
I feel like the students are tiring, and I kind of am too a little bit of. Well, doctoral mastery is just feeling so repetitive to me. Okay, what are the 3 principles of spiritual learning? Act in faith, blah, blah, like they, I ask, we talk about them. They don't roll their eyes at me, but I can almost feel an eye roll, Okay, let's do these scenarios. Billy offers you drugs at school. What do? We act in faith. We don't take them. We, look at journal conference talks to read about don't do drugs. And like, it just, I just feel like I'm having a really hard time making it something more than just very sort of superficial and what's the word? Formulaic, right? And yeah, that's it, I guess. I don't get the feeling when I do doctrinal mastery that anyone's really loving it.
Yeah, and your concern is you're not alone. Now, I will say this, on one hand, don't resent the formula. I think the formula is actually purposeful. In fact, Chad Webb's even talked about this, that in the formation, if you want to go back and look at my summer videos on Canvas, does anybody even go to Canvas anymore? I don't even look at it. It's probably cobwebs everywhere. Good, Michaela, good on you.
I don't resent it at all. I just.
Well, but let me say this, though. There was a reason, and as they formed it, it really was, we want this driven into them, right? And so there is that's purposeful. I will say this, though. I totally get it. Variety, we need variety. Kids at 6 a.m. need variety, right? They need to start seeing that. And so I did the lesson gym this week for next week on the doctrinal mastery practice. And admittedly, because I'm not teaching every day, I haven't looked at every one of these to see how they are. But this one had some interesting ideas that were a different way to do everything that you do on a practice day. They had a different way of reviewing and kind of memorizing Matthew 16. They had a different way of doing the review of the principles of acquiring spiritual knowledge. And then they had a scenario, but the way they have you do the scenario was a little different. And then what you'll see in my video is I push all 3 of them a little even further, which you can totally do. In the name of variety, push them a little bit, but you'll see the video. You don't need me to retell you what you're about to watch on there. What I would invite you to do, though, is to think about, okay, how can we make this into a game? How can we play a little bit of a game with this? And what would get my students more engaged? So if there's not any other questions, let me do just 4 minutes of training, because that's all we got time for here.
Chad, can I just jump in with one
Sure.
comment?
Sure.
Probably being the oldest person in this Zoom, and I've been teaching, this is 11 years. So I can say from the very beginning, from doctrinal mastery, this year, our kids have probably 80% of them in their heads, maybe not memorized perfectly, but they've got them in their heads. And it's all because there has been so many opportunities to use it, play games with it, variety. What you're saying is absolutely true.
Yeah, and so sometimes I think we look over the variety that maybe is written in the curriculum because we're like, my kids aren't gonna like that. That seems like a primary thing to do. Like, for instance, the thing this week is cut out a bunch of little keys and write a line from the scripture on each, whatever, and then see if they can put them in order. And my first thought was to dismiss that. Teenagers wouldn't want to do that. And then I thought, why wouldn't teenagers want to do that? Are you kidding? You see what they doodle on their notebook? So do it. See what it is. Make a game out of it. Anyway, I talk about that. I got asked the question from one teacher, help us get our students to go deeper. And then I got from you the doctrinal mastery application lessons are not very engaging. And then somebody else asked me, I think it was actually you, Allison, about something about allowing students to share more of the burden of teaching. That's how I phrased it, but that's not how you said it, but that's how I phrase it. And I thought 3 birds, 1 stone. So let me tell you what I used to do with old seminary scripture mastery, because I came here in 2015 and doctrinal mastery since 2016. But what I used to do, because I didn't love what we used to do, was hold up a giant card with the scripture mastery verse, and we'd all read it like a bunch of bored robots together. And the Lord said, I need 5, go and do, and everybody would just say it like that. And I'm like, what are we doing? Because the kids would put it in their absolute short-term memory, and then they wouldn't remember it, 2 minutes later. And so what I started to do was I would, and I'm just giving this to you, not as an idea, but as a principle. I started using, this is how old it was. I used an overhead projector. Do you remember that, with the little transparencies? And I would project onto the whiteboard a projection of the scripture. And then I would teach them how to mark it. We would look for the main doctrine and we would circle it together, and I would draw it on the board and they would circle it in their scriptures, because this was also before everybody had smartphones. But you can do all this in a digital version. And then I would teach them how to, okay, are there other scriptures that teach the same principle? And we'd write them in the margins, or I'd give them time and they would look up scriptures and say, oh, does this one apply? And we'd write that in the margins. And then we would think about, okay, how does this apply to us? Like, what would we want to use this verse for? Let's get some situations. My whole goal with that was that if they were called in, like, they could walk in a sacrament meeting, the bishop could say, our youth speaker's not here. Can you give us a 5-minute talk? They could open up their scriptures and have a talk almost ready to go because of the way they mark their scriptures. Now, I taught them how to do that the first 2 or 3 weeks of the semester. Then I said to them, all right, I'm going to do this one more time. And we did it the same way every week. I said, I'm going to do it one more time, but next week, I'm not saying a word. I'm going to throw the marker at one of you, and you're going to do what I've been doing the last 4 weeks. You're going to do it. And so then they're all like, we're paying attention. And so then the next week, I had a marker, and I'm like, all right, who's my student? Who's the teacher? And they all were like, whatever. I throw it to one of them. I said, I'm not saying a word for the next 15 minutes. And then I went to the back of the room and I sat down. And the student would say, so what do you want me to do? And I'm like, and they're like, oh, he's really not going to talk. So they'd go up to the board. The projection was there. And then it was amazing to see every time they did it. Even when I had all freshmen, they would start to do what I did. And they'd say, all right, well, what's the key doctrine? And then they would start doing it their own way, but they always had a great conversation and they did it. And I just sat in the back of the room for 15 minutes and just watched them do it. The principle for me was, you want to get your kids going deeper, give them ownership of some of the lesson. Train them on how to do some of the basic things we're doing. I mean, the principles of acquiring spiritual knowledge, come on. I mean, like, we've trained them now how to kind of go over those things. Let them start doing it. Give the marker to one of your kids and say, hey, will you take us through it? I don't even care how you do it. And have them share some of the burden of the lesson. Hey, rather than us read a scenario from the book about Juan and his marijuana soccer players, why don't you guys, let's come up with some scenarios that you've actually seen. And let's, in fact, everybody open up your journals. I want you to write down a scenario that you think matches our doctrinal mastery this week. And then let's use that. You can start doing that and give them the burden of the lesson a little bit more, is what I would say. Oh man, it's 8:26. We got to stop. Thanks for coming on a Thursday night. I'm so sorry again that I totally blew it. Watch these lesson gems. I hope they're helpful. I hope they're not costing you time. I hope they are saving you time. As we kind of go through this. It looks like I'm getting some thumbs up out there, because they really are. We've never had better curriculum. I don't think we've ever had better curriculum.
That's true.
Anyway, much love to you people. If you want to stay and ask me more questions, we'll let all the rest of the people go, but we'll call it a night. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.